What the Czech and Jewish nations have in common is a sense of humor. Even in the darkest times, I'm sure that you all here also like humor, so please let me start with a joke. Nazi occupied the country and Jew Robíček goes to find out what possibilities he has for emigration. An employee of the travel agency takes a globe and points to the individual countries. Emigration to Palestine is prohibited. The quota for Americans is already filled. It's difficult to get visa for England. You need financial guarantees to China, Paraguay, Brazil, and most of the other countries does not accept Jews. I see, answers Robíček. May I ask you a question? Don't you have another globe? We are living also in a very difficult times of security crisis. We are facing nuclear threat and the upcoming economic crisis. According to some studies, the level of democracy went down to 1989 levels, populism is on the rise, and 70% of the global population live in dictatorships. There can be more tensions and expressions of hatred, xenophobia, and anti-Semitism. Just 3 weeks ago, I was as a guest speaker in Bratislava, and there was a shooting aimed on Jews and LGBT community. 2 innocent people, young students, were killed. There is no another globe. Therefore, the aim of our conference is to take another significant step in future Holocaust remembrance, education of young generation as a means of preventing similar atrocities in our time and in the future, combating anti-Semitism, and tackling injustice from the time of Holocaust. Someone once said that justice is like a train that is almost always late. I add, we must contribute that the train will arrive one day. Also, as a warning for those who do similar things in our days. As a part of the conference program is social welfare of the Holocaust survivors and also the reflection of the Russian aggression in Ukraine. We don't give up. In this we can learn from Holocaust survivors. On the occasion of our conference, we announced 2 months ago also a video contest for young people in production of short videos on the topic why and how commemorate Holocaust today. Later, you will be able to see the videos and meet the winners, including 16 years old Natalia Lira, who escaped from Ukraine to Great Britain because of the war. And there, she was invited and currently, she is being hosted by Holocaust survivors, Lydia Tischler, who is originally from Czechoslovakia and went to Ghetto Terezín. And now, please, let me invite our first speaker and host, who will open this conference, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, Jan Lipavský.
Dear Holocaust survivors, Madam Vice President, Ministers, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Prague, to the premises of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It is a true honor for me to open this conference and one of the main events of our EU presidency. As you might recall, the previous conference on the Holocaust-era assets, which took place in 2009 and which adopted the Terezín Declaration, was organized during our very first EU presidency. I think we are establishing an important tradition here. This gathering is not only about the past, It is not only about the Holocaust as such, it also serves as a major reminder of all that happened at the time of the Holocaust. It tells us how low can humanity sink if it is allowed to do so. And that message, that warning, is today in Europe more topical than it has been in decades. Let me quote the first president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel. When opening our conference in 2009, he said, "It is increasingly important to record the Holocaust and demonstrate to ourselves and to our children the inevitability consequences of fanatism and of racial and national hatred." I suppose there is no need to go into details how relevant this is for our present-day reality. There's no need to describe the horrors that Russia causes every day to millions of people all over Ukraine, on a few hundred kilometers east from here. Yet, not only the acts, but equally the words coming from Moscow, the aggressors' narrative about their crimes, are truly horrifying. Consistent efforts of the Russian propaganda machine to dehumanize the victims of its armies should sound all alarms that we have because of the Holocaust tragic experience. After all, the most repeated Holocaust lesson for the future generation has been summed up with the words, "Never again." Even though the war in Ukraine stands in the forefront of our immediate attention, we must not forget about another very dangerous phenomenon. It has been growing steadily over the last decades in many corners of the world, and I speak about anti-Semitism. I'm proud that Czechia is quite successful in combat with this issue, and the number of anti-Semitic crimes remains one of the lowest in the world. Yet, we know it exists in this country too, and that it is growing in some sectors of our society. We know that we must pay much more attention to this problem in Czechia as well as in the rest of the world. This phenomenon keeps changing all the time. It takes on new forms and is being carried on by new groups. Ladies and gentlemen, the current developments in Europe are giving your deliberations a new dimension. However, we should not forget that the primary reason for your meeting here is to review the tasks set by the conference in 2009 and by the Terezín Declaration. I understand that a lot has been accomplished already, but a lot of remains to be done. I'm confident this conference will move these efforts forward. To close my remarks, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all organizers of the conference, as well as everybody else who participated in preparations. Finally, I want to thank you all for coming to Prague and taking part in this important and noble effort. Thank you very much.
Hebrew is not one of the languages of the European Union yet, but let me invite Meirav Cohen, Minister of Social Equality of the State of Israel in Hebrew, to the stage. Kvod Sarah Cohen, ani mazminotach labama.
Thank you, Robert. Without memory, our existence would be barren and opaque. It is memory that will save humanity. These words were spoken by Elie Wiesel in his 1986 Nobel lecture. We have gathered here at the Terezín conference to discuss the memory of the Holocaust. We are here because a survey commissioned in 2020 by the Claims Conference found that 63% of Americans between the ages of 18 and 39 did not know that 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis, and 11% of respondents believed Jews caused the Holocaust. We are here because anti-Semitic violence and remarks from both the left and the right, shooting in synagogues, blatant racism on campuses, and on Twitter. In Israel, the average age of Holocaust survivors is 86, and every day, an average of 40 survivors decease. We are here because time is running out, and soon, very soon, the responsibility to remember will be only ours. In that same noble lecture, Wiesel said, "Remembering is a noble and necessary act. The call of memory, the call to memory, reaches us from the very dawn of history. No commandment figures so frequently, so insistently in the Bible." Take Passover, for example. In the Hebrew month of Nisan, every year, Jews from around the world tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt. We eat matzah bread like we did 3,400 years ago. This is a part of our collective memory and who we are as a people. But as it says in the Haggadah, the prayer book from which we read on Passover Eve, in each and every generation, a person is obliged to regard himself as he had come out of Egypt. For it is written, "And you shall tell your son that day, it is on account of what God did for me when I came out of Egypt." In other words, collective memory is impossible to achieve without a personal connection. We have to see ourselves in the tragedy in order for it to be truly inscribed in our souls. When I wanted to teach my daughters about the Holocaust, I didn't tell them about the camps and the gas chambers. I read them the diary of Anne Frank, a young girl, just like them, becoming a woman. Just months before she and her family were discovered by the Nazis and sent to their death, Anna wrote, "I want to be useful or bring enjoyment to all people, even those I've never met. I want to go on living, even after my death." There are still stories that need to be told. And all of these stories, those we have recorded and those we have yet to record, need to be heard. They need to be heard so that we can preserve the truth in a world of fake news and denial. I call on all governments to work together to commemorate and preserve stories of Holocaust survivors. Extensive and meaningful work has been done to record these personal stories, but there are more, and time is running out. We must collaborate and move fast together to make sure that the true stories of the atrocities that happened just 80 years ago live on forever. Thank you.
Toda rabba, Sarah Cohen, thank you very much. We are very pleased to have here the Vice President of the European Commission, Věra Jourová.
Dear ministers Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to be here with you today, and I want to start by thanking to the Czech presidency of the Council of the EU and the Czech Special Envoy for Holocaust Issues for organizing this conference. The Holocaust left a dark stain on European history and erased Jewish life and heritage in many parts of the European continent. As Europeans, it is our duty to ensure remembrance, research, and education on Holocaust. It is our duty to honor its victims and descendants. It is also of crucial importance to reflect on finding a way to restore justice and adopt plans that consider the financial reality of survivors that are still among us. We can only learn the lessons of history if we know our past. For generations, we have been counting on testimonies and stories told by those who lived through the horror of Holocaust, those that experienced first-hand suffering and witnessed death of their families and friends. I remember each and every of my meetings with the Holocaust survivors. I remember being in Auschwitz in the snowy, cold January 2020, listening to Marian Turski, to Batsheva Dagan, or to Tova Friedman. That evening, before the ceremony in Auschwitz, I was sitting at the event next to the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And we were discussing the situation in the world. We were discussing the matters relating to anti-Semitism and the rise of hatred. And the story which went through our discussion with Volodymyr Zelensky could be marked by two words: never again. That very man was showing to the world the atrocities which happened in Bucha or Irpin, and informed about forced deportations of Ukrainian people, especially children, to Russia. Never again seems not to be the truth. This is also why Holocaust remembrance is more important than ever, and we must work hard to preserve it, as the last survivors and their stories are passing away. With the digital era and a more ethnically diverse Europe, we can find new ways of remembrance to ensure that future generations of Europeans will honor the legacy of their survivors and retell accurately this darkest period of our common history. Anti-Semitism, however, did not end with the Holocaust. 3 generations after this tragedy, anti-Semitism is still worryingly on the rise, offline and newly online. Anti-Semitism exploded online during the COVID-19 pandemic and continues to rise. Conspiracy myths and hate speech are contributing to radicalization, physical and even lethal attacks. I am going to Bratislava today, to the place where the people were murdered because of who they are. And I think that we must not be passive, and we have to do much more to prevent such horrible things. Since I led the fight against anti-Semitism in the previous commission, I have seen a significant rise of anti-Semitic incidents. And indeed, we do not have another globe, as Mr. Roubíček was calling for. We also do not have another Europe. We need to have Europe as a good place for Jews to live. In light of this, it's not a good news that, according to many surveys, we see that many Jews are considering emigration. The latest figure is 38% of Jews have considered emigrating because they do not feel safe as Jews in the EU. And this is not acceptable. When the Jews are packing their suitcases and planning to emigrate, it shows that there is something brutally in disorder in Europe. That's why we decided to accelerate the fight against anti-Semitism and presented the first ever EU strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. And when the European Commission, which I represent here, is issuing or publishing, elaborating the strategy, of course, we cannot do it without strong support from the member states. And I have to say that all EU member states have welcomed it and committed to adopt national strategies on combating anti-Semitism by the end of this year. The Commission will support them and watch closely at the commitments. The strategy includes almost 100 actions between 2021 and 2030. More than half have started and several have already been implemented. There are three main goals: preventing and combating all forms of anti-Semitism, protecting and fostering Jewish life in the EU, and the third, education, research, and Holocaust remembrance. And I agree with Minister Cohen, who just said that too many people does not have a clue about what happened in Europe. And we all are aware that ignorance is one of the driving forces of anti-Semitism. That's why in our strategy there is so much emphasis on education. There are two flagship actions which I wanted to tell you about as part of the European Year of Youth 2020. We are creating a network of young European ambassadors on the Holocaust that will learn from survivors to retell their stories online and offline. We are also creating a network of places where Holocaust happened to show that it happened locally and people had a choice and a duty to act in the face of neighbors being persecuted and deported. I know many of you will be visiting Terezín tomorrow. I would like to call on everyone to put in all efforts to safeguard the heritage of Terezín in a sustainable way. I very much appreciate the plans of the Deputy Prime Minister Bartoš to spearhead its revitalization, and I hope we can find a good use for the site. EU regional funds can play an important role, and this could be complemented by Terezín becoming part of the European Holocaust research infrastructure, creating synergies with other institutions. We are also organizing a civil society forum later this month to support networking for projects related to the EU strategy that I mentioned earlier. The strategy includes also actions to be taken by EU member states. Member states hold the key to pushing back anti-Semitism, to promoting Holocaust education and remembrance, and to ensuring a future for Jewish life in Europe. Several member states already adopted strategies and appointed a national coordinator. Others, including the Czech Republic, are working on it. And I am very pleased to cooperate with the United States on this matter. We share common values, including this joint endeavor to fight all forms of racism and xenophobia, including anti-Semitism. This cooperation already bears fruit. Earlier this month, we jointly organized an international conference on freedom of religion with regard to religious slaughter, which is an important issue for many Jewish communities. Unfortunately, not everyone learned the lessons of the past. I have to come back to Ukraine. Today's suffering of Ukrainians, Russian military bombing civil infrastructure, atrocities in Bucha and many other places bring the ghost of the past to life. Again, we see injustice and crimes. It is a test of decency for all of us. Will we react this time the right way to fight injustice and punish the crime? Or will we turn a blind eye, search for excuses of appeasement, and let the brutal force to rule? I hope not. Up to now, what we have been doing shows that we stand united next to and for Ukraine. No more appeasement, no more repetition of the mistakes of the past. I believe we are on the right track. Because the actions of Russian regime don't leave much space to be neutral or ignorant. Everyone who remembers the strategy of the past, like the Holocaust, must stand up and fight injustice. This is why we need to support Ukraine with all the means necessary. We need to support the Ukrainians, financially, militarily, morally. It's our duty. And we must send a clear message to Putin's regime that such war crimes and aggression are not acceptable and that there will be severe consequences. We will hold accountable those who are responsible for war crimes. The perpetrators must be punished, they must pay. Ladies and gentlemen, the EU is a good address for diversity and for Jewish communities, but we cannot remain complacent or close our eyes to existing problems. I already told you that there are too many Jews planning to leave EU, and that my deepest conviction is that it is not acceptable, and this is not who we are and who we want to be today. Our efforts today can prevent a tragedy of tomorrow. When we say never again, we mean it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice President of the European Commission, Věra Jourová. And I would like to invite Colette Avital, Chairperson of the Center Organizations of Holocaust Survivors.
Mr. Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, Madam Vice President of the European Commission, my own good minister, Meirav Cohen, Robert Řehák, esteemed representatives, my good friend Avraham Roet. Before the war, some 3,200 Jews lived in the city of Groningen in the Netherlands, but only 200 survived the war. The unusually high percentage of the people deported to the extermination camps was partly the result of the effective and fast way in which the municipality delivered to the Nazis complete lists of all the Jewish residents and all the Jewish-owned properties and businesses. When the 200 survivors, walking shadows hardly alive, returned, they were subjected to yet another crime. They were not allowed to return to their homes or those of their murdered parents because they had been confiscated and or either sold by the Germans and the Nazi collaborators during the war. This is one of the untold stories about the Netherlands, but it happened in so many countries all over Europe, not only in Eastern Europe. Moreover, upon returning to their towns or villages, the survivors were told in no uncertain terms that this was no longer a place for them. In Eastern Europe, the communist regimes completed what the Nazis had not finished doing. They took homes, properties, businesses, all were confiscated, nationalized. We're grateful to you, Mr. Minister, and to your government for your leadership in convening us here 24 years after the first Terezín conference to try to finally solve the unfinished business of the 20th century, the return of the plundered, immovable, and cultural properties of the victims of war, the millions of Jews who were murdered, the thousands who returned homeless and penniless, that which our Bible terms, thou hast murdered and also inherited. We're fully aware and appreciate the fact that you have convened this conference notwithstanding the deep crisis that tears Europe as a result of the bloody war in the Ukraine, a war that takes its daily toll of innocent victims, of people who simply want to live their lives in their homeland. We thought that war in Europe was over. Well, obviously it is not. So our hearts go out to them at the sight of the brutal murders and untold destruction. But unlike in the past, and you said it so well, Madam Vice President, we see today solidarity. The world does not sit silent. The Holocaust, however, was different in its scope, in its magnitude, in its purpose. It was not only the greatest genocide well planned in world history, but also the greatest theft of a people's entire possessions, their cultural and religious heritage, a theft of Jewish immovable and movable properties, financial assets, insurance benefits, art, Judaica, books, furniture, gold. And then the world did stay silent. During the past 24 years, a lot has been achieved. A few countries have passed legislation, funds obtained from the sale of communal properties which have been retrieved have made it possible to create local foundations which help the Holocaust needy survivors. Restitution has become a norm, widely recognized and supported by world leaders and parliaments, from the European Union to the United States, from Canada to Britain. Declarations and resolutions have been adopted. A full report of the status of the return of those properties, country by country, has been compiled by us at the WJRO, thanks to the JUST Act adopted by the US Congress, and it is available for all of you to take here. And yet, with all that has been accomplished, our work to rectify the wrongs of the Holocaust remains highly incomplete. Even though legislation exists in a few countries, negotiations are still pursued in others. The pace of restitution has been very slow, hampered by countless legal constraints, procedures, and bureaucratic hurdles. Some countries who are now rewriting their history to embellish it do not wish to acknowledge the responsibility for the role played by some of their people during the war. And in many countries, properties left behind by those who have not returned from the camps reverts to the state. As to our cultural heritage, mainly art, the scale of the brutality and efficiency of the theft was also unprecedented in history. True, the Washington principles have made a difference. Many museums practice today provenance research. A few works of art, but very few, have been returned, and yet hundreds of thousands of works of art still are lying in the storage houses of museums, still unidentified, still missing. In Israel, in the United States, in Central Europe, in the Ukraine, and in Russia, thousands of Holocaust survivors, most of them in their late 80s, many of them in their 90s, still live in terrible and unacceptable conditions, often ailing and alone, traumatized, and therefore more vulnerable than the rest of the population. Their needs have changed. Anti-Semitism, and you've heard about it today enough, which has raised its ugly head, brings back old memories and deep fears. We must provide the necessary care for their changing needs. 24 years ago, the opening statement of the declaration, of the Terezín Declaration, acknowledged that, and I quote, "We need to deal with the social welfare needs of the survivors as an issue of utmost urgency." 24 years have passed, and so many of them are no longer with us. In Israel alone, 40 Holocaust survivors die every day. Mr. Minister, ladies and gentlemen, time is of essence. We have ahead a very narrow window of opportunity to render just a small measure of justice, to make the lives of the survivors just a bit more bearable. It is with a sense of urgency that I turn to you. This gathering is a unique opportunity. Let its outcome be not merely good intentions and empty words. Let us not lose sight of what Elie Wiesel once termed as the conscience, morality, and memory. What we need now are concrete plans of action. Surely, hairless properties can be used to create special funds for the needy survivors. Concrete steps can and must be taken to cut bureaucracy, facilitate and speed up the restitution process so as to enable us all to see that justice is not only preached, it is achieved. Elie Wiesel, whom we are remembering here today so much, once said, "To be a Jew is to remember." Yes, we do remember. It is our duty to remember. History will judge not only the perpetrators of the greatest tragedy that befell the Jewish people, history will also remember positively those of us who helped redress the wrongs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colette Avital, who is actually also a Holocaust survivor. Now I would like to pass the floor to Sharon Buenos from Zikaron BaSalon, who will introduce Avraham Roet, Holocaust survivor, who is today with us. Thank you.
In 2011, a group of young Israelis gathered to commemorate Yom HaShoah, Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Day, in a different way. They wanted to do something different because they realized that their connection to the Holocaust had deteriorated and they were looking for new meaning. They invited Holocaust survivor Hannah Gofrit to share her testimony. Following Hannah's testimony, someone pulled out a guitar. Few participants began to sing. Some were crying, some were laughing. Then they started to talk and ask themselves about their connection to Holocaust remembrance and what it means to our lives today. That evening was very special and marked the beginning of a new initiative, Zikaron BaSalon, Remembrance in the Living Room. Zikaron BaSalon is a social initiative commemorating the Holocaust, connecting between Holocaust survivors and the young generations. We do it in intimate and meaningful gatherings. Today, 2 million people participate in Zikaron BaSalon gatherings. Our goal is for each and every one of us to take personal responsibility for Holocaust commemoration. It is not only up to survivors and their descendants. It is not up to only museums and educators. We all do whatever we can to ensure the testimonies of the Shoah will live from generation to generation. But Zikaron BaSalon is not only about remembrance. To us, it is a journey through time. We remember the past so we can shape our future. I've heard testimonies before. I've learned about the Holocaust. I've read books. I watched films. And yet, my first Zikaron BaSalon in 2016 was an evening that I will never forget. The small group, the sense of togetherness was something very remarkable. I also chose to quote Elie Wiesel, and he said, "When you listen to a witness, you become a witness." As we are facing a rise in anti-Semitic events, Holocaust denial and distortion, we owe it to survivors and the victims to make sure the world will never forget. Time is running out. We know the things we can still do today, we might not be able to do tomorrow. This is why we are working tirelessly to locate every survivor who would like to share their testimony with the next generation. I would like to thank the Minister for Social Equality, Mrs. Meirav Cohen, for opening the doors to the Czech Republic and convey our appreciation to Special Envoy, Dr. Robert Řehák, for being such a great and instrumental partner here in Prague. As part of history lessons, educators across the Czech Republic use Zikaron BaSalon as an educational tool, connecting students with Holocaust survivors. These gatherings leave the students with profound impressions, creating the basis for deep conversation about Holocaust commemoration and combating anti-Semitism. I would like to take this opportunity while I address you today. Please join us. Let's work together to bring Zikaron BaSalon to high schools, to universities, to communities. Let's work together to bring the survivors' testimonies into people's homes and people's hearts. I'm honored to share this moment with Holocaust survivor Avraham Roet. Avraham is a great friend of Zikaron BaSalon, and we are lucky to learn from him every time we meet. It is my pleasure to introduce him, as I'm sure we will all learn something new today. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Jenna, Mr. Lipavsky, our Minister Meirav Cohen, and Colette Avital, and especially I would like to say Mr. Stuart Eisenstadt, who has done so much for the Holocaust survivors that it really needs a special mention here. I want to say I'm a little bit emotional because I listened here to the speech of Antony Blinken, of the Secretary of State of the United States, and it's exactly 78 years ago that I was liberated by American parachutists. Many of them died in Holland, and this is really special to come to an Holocaust conference here in Prague and to hear him speak, to see all of you talking about the Holocaust, to come back to my, to what I want to tell about the memory in the salon. The memory in the salon is therefore highly important because we, our generation, never talked with our parents, nor with our family, nor with our children about what happened to us in the Holocaust. There is certain reasons for, I don't know why. I came to Israel in 46. I have 4 sons, 11 grandchildren. And during the whole period of their education, we never talked about the Holocaust because there is, between most of the Holocaust survivors, is a trauma not to speak what happened to them. And we didn't want our trauma from the Holocaust to transfer to our children. We wanted them to live free of any trauma and of any influence of the Holocaust on our own life. Now, there is nothing comparable to the Holocaust. That has never happened, that the government, in this case the German government, decided to destroy and complete other people, that the Jewish people, but not only the Jews themselves, their culture, their heritage, everything. Now, when we want to our second and third generation, and now it starts already the 4th generation, when we speak about the Holocaust, it's this organization who came to me and asked me to go to outside and to talk with people about the Holocaust experience. The main meetings are at home of people, some 40, 50 people. It's always crowded, and always the second generation is there. And what is the interesting thing we see? My own children, they go everywhere where I speak, they come because they want to hear my story that they never heard during their story at home. In these meetings, we find the second and third generation, and what's happening, that many of them, they know exactly what happened in the Holocaust. They learned it in school, they got education, they got experience, but they never met anybody really who knows about it and who could tell of his own history. And today, also our second generation, and they are so interested, you cannot imagine, that whatever they say about the second and third generation, in my activities in which I do for the Holocaust survivors in Europe, I meet many clerks, many people working for the governments of the second and especially the third generation. The first generation we all know. The second generation still feels the guilt of their parents. The grandchildren, the third generation, they are not a part of it. They learn it in school, they understand it, but they have much less responsibility for the Holocaust, because the grandparents, there is less responsibility from grandchildren as about their grandparents. But they are very interested. They are knowledge, they are very interested, and I always feel in the background. But it's not only the second generation. I was about a month ago with our Prime Minister in Germany, and we met with the Chancellor of Germany, we met with the Minister of Finance, and we held there a lecture, 5 of us Holocaust survivors. It was supposed to take half an hour, and it took more than 1.5 hours. It upset the complete program of the Chancellor, of the Minister of Finance, and of our Prime Minister, because they wanted to listen, and they spoke with everybody, with us later personally. It was a very great experience. So they also want to hear the story. What I think is very important, and I visit regularly, or not regularly anymore, since the corona, very rarely, but I think it's extremely important in Europe also to start that those few of Holocaust survivors, but are still, Colette mentioned they are dying 40 a day, but there are still many of us children's Holocaust survivors and also elder Holocaust survivors are able to speak and are able to tell their story. And I think it's extremely important that this same type of organization will be held in Europe, and I hope that Minister Jourová who are doing a lot, who will also think about to organize this type of activity. Now, the last I want to tell you, maybe it's a little about my own story. I was born in Holland in 1946 from a very liberal family, Orthodox liberal family. We were at home 6 children and 1 adopted child who was sent to us by their parents from Poland. Most regretfully, my 2 sisters and my adopted brother died in Auschwitz. And then we came back. I was saved myself by Rightness of the Nations, which were, by the way, a very small minority of the Dutch people. I myself was hidden by these people, but you must understand that in that period I was hidden, I went to about 14 different addresses, because every time I came to some place, and in Holland, you know, there are very much open windows, and every neighbor knows what's happening with his neighbor. And every time they would come and warn the people where I was hiding, they would warn them, look, the Germans or the Dutch police, it was mainly Dutch police, they know that you have a Jewish child in home, and they had immediately to bring me to another address. So it was not very easy. The cooperation of the Dutch establishment and the Dutch cities, there are coming out now terrible reports about the way they received the Jews after the war. Colette mentioned one case. I just want to tell you that if my classmate, Anna Frank, if she would have come back to Holland, they would have put her in a special camp for German citizens, because she was not Dutch, she's not a Dutch citizen. And they said that all the Germans has to go to special camps. It took my father and the director of a local high school and about a week to get them free, those who came back from Bergen-Belsen. So the story of the Holocaust survivors after the war in Holland took at least 10, 50 years. Still there came some acknowledgement of what happened, and today I must say the Dutch government is treating the Holocaust survivors very well. So to come back to the to this to say. I want to thank you very much for listening to me, and I hope that this conference will have concrete results, both in because there is, it's my task, and that's the only reason I came here, to remember and to remember and to tell you to remember the Holocaust survivors and not to forget. And that's my mission here, and I thank you very much.